Welcome, everyone, to the Over Under Movies podcast, where we take a prominent figure or franchise in the world of filmmaking and ask the simple question, are they overrated or are they underrated? My name is DeAngelis. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host. He just got back from listening to some awesome poetry, Mr. Jason Gong. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. That poetry was very moving, and I'm feeling good. I'm hyped to talk about this topic.
Yeah, man. Shout out to poetry. We're not talking about poetry. It is not what this podcast is about.
Not even well, actually, there's a lot of repetition. In a way, this film rhymes with itself.
Today we are talking about the 2014 underrated gem.
Well, that remains to be seen.
Edge of Tomorrow, or Live, Die, Repeat, or All You Need Is Kill.
That's the best title by far.
Before we get into the meat of the podcast, I do want to let anybody listening to this podcast that, yes, this exists in an audio format on Spotify, Apple Pods, all those good places. You can also listen to us straight from our Buzzsprout website, which I know a lot of our listeners have been doing. Really appreciate that. You can also see our smiling faces here on YouTube. So hello, everybody listening to our podcast here on YouTube. Finally starting to get our bearings here with the podcast. We at the time of recording this, we've done episode 6 is coming out tomorrow, I think.
Yeah, I think 6.
So we're already way ahead of most podcasts. We got a lot of podcasts in the bag. No signs of slowing down from us right now. We're actually struggling with we have too many ideas. Yeah. We have too many things we want to do episodes on. So it's a good problem to have. Let's talk about Edge of Tomorrow. One of my favorite movies of the last 15 years. This movie's fucking awesome. Again, this is not is this movie good or is this movie bad podcast. I think we're both in agreement here. This is a good movie. You had not seen this movie before we saw this a few weeks ago. This is one of my movies that if someone's hey, what's a good movie to watch that I've never seen before? And this is just a blind spot for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I've shown this movie to so many people at this point. I'm you got to watch Edge of Tomorrow. It's so freaking good. This is your first time seeing it. What was your quick review, seeing it for the first time?
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. I think I've never seen a bad time loop movie. So this is a time loop film. Tom Cruise has to relive the same day over and over. But the spin of it being a sci-fi war time loop film was a lot of fun. And it's just really action-packed and funny the whole way through. And you end up really rooting for all the characters. And I think you're right. It's a really good time.
So this movie is based on a book called All You Need Is Kill, which I believe is a Japanese book.
Yeah, it's a light novel, I believe.
Yeah, it was written, the original book was written in 2004. They did a graphic novel, and then they re-released an English translation for that graphic novel a year before this movie came out. This is a movie that famously is known to have been botched on the marketing side of things, because you're thinking this is a Tom Cruise movie. This is Emily Blunt. This is Doug Liman, who directed the Bourne franchise. He did Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So you think that this is a good combo for movie that's going to make a lot at the box office. This movie has a lot of action in it. This movie has a lot of comedy in it. On the surface level, you think there's no way this movie can flop. And in a way, this movie didn't flop. I was actually surprised when I went back and I checked the numbers on this. It had a budget of $178 million plus $100 million marketing campaign behind it, which started more than a year before the movie came out with the graphic novel, and it made $370 million at the box office.
So it made money.
There's been a sequel that has been rumored and in the works forever now at this point. Who knows if that'll ever happen?
Do you know how much of that money was from overseas and how much was domestic?
It was 60 to 70% overseas.
Yeah, so Asian markets really just big sci-fi war movies.
Yeah, where you're fighting aliens. They love seeing us fight aliens.
That's where the Transformers money comes from too. It's just Asian markets.
Yeah. I think of the Independence Day sequel.
Did that do well overseas?
Yeah, well, a big part of that movie's plot is that there's a world alliance, but the leaders of that are China. China's in charge of all of it.
I see.
And so they're hey, we got to get that Chinese market. It's a big one.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, this movie stars Tom Cruise. He plays Major William Cage, who is a PR guy for the military. He's not
such a fun way to kick off.
He's not a foot soldier. In the book, the main character is a soldier. He is just a regular soldier.
Yeah, I think he's a younger guy too.
Yeah. So I think that's a great change. Tom Cruise is somebody that you're used to seeing him play Jack Reacher, right? Or Mission Impossible.
Yeah, Ethan Hunt.
Yeah, all of his movies, he's usually the badass, and he's the guy with all the skills. He has no skills in this movie.
It's awesome.
And he gets thrown on the front lines of this battle that is a battle on a beach. Obviously, there's going to be the D-Day parallels there, and it's just a bloodbath. Like, they just get fucking wiped by these aliens. Super cool looking aliens, super unique looking aliens. Like, they're like squid things. They remind me a lot of the Sentinels from the Matrix movies.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
They're called mimics, and one of the mimics, he kills it, and its blood gets all over him as he's dying, and that results in him doing a time loop for the past 24 hours. And basically, the rest of the movie, not to spoil it too much here, is just him figuring out how to make it through the day. He eventually links up with Sergeant Rita Tasky, who's played by Emily Blunt, who's fucking phenomenal in this movie. And then those two together are trying to figure out a way to like take out all the aliens. Super simple concept, but like you said, there's something about time loop movies. Like, what is it about this format that just seems to work, you think?
I think there's some power fantasy in it. So, like, when you watch any one of these time loop movies, you get to see the character just live 1,000 years and gain basically superpowers because they are immortal. Like you said, Tom Cruise starts off with no skills, which I think was a brilliant place to put him, because then you get to see his progression, not from being a soldier into being a super soldier, but from being like just a little weak guy, and watch him grow into the most competent soldier that there is. And it's fun to root for him in that way. And then you see the same thing in like Groundhog Day. The character learns to play piano with all of the time that he's been given. Everyone fantasizes like, oh, if I had all the time in the world, I could do this, I could learn this, I would speak so many languages. But then with these movies, you see the characters get the opportunity to do that. And I think that's just a lot of fun for people.
Yeah, and what I think is cool from the filmmaking side of things is it allows the directors to really cut out the fluff that you would see. The very first time he goes through the time loop, you kind of see the majority of that first day. You see that first battle on the beach. And then once you get into the second day, they can start cutting things up. And then once they get to the third day, they can cut it even more. And then you can like lace in like various failure points that are like played for comedy. Like there's one part where he's trying to like get away from his squad leader so he can go talk to Emily Blunt. And that involves him like rolling under a Jeep to get away.
Yeah.
But he fucks up and he gets run over and killed by the Jeep instead. So it just hard cuts to 24 hours later. It's great. It's great that you're able to put those like little vignettes in there. And yeah, and seeing that difference between the very first time he suits up, where he's absolutely terrified, he knows he's going to die, the entire first fight sequence, he doesn't know how to turn the safety off on his weapons.
Yeah.
It results in him turning like his like viewfinder on like Japanese so he can't read it anymore, which is a nightmare. If anybody's ever done that on like your cell phone, like you've accidentally put your cell phone in another language.
I did that at a checkout, like a self-checkout line at the supermarket, and then I had to call for help, and the guy came over and yelled at me. Another thing, I think, in this movie in particular, I think they have a lot of the same, like, moments and touchstones in those repetitions, so you know, like, what's coming, and Tom Cruise starts learning how to beat them. So in a sense, I think this movie is a lot like playing a video game.
Absolutely. I absolutely feel like this is like a video game in that regard.
I just watched you play Spider-Man 2, and I watched you lose to Craven, maybe 7 times.
Hey, we don't need to talk about that.
Like, I
Put me
like,
on blast.
This is so embarrassing that this guy can't beat Craven.
Wow,
and
this guy fucking sucks.
Then I saw you learn the patterns from fighting Craven, and you knew when to dodge, and it's the exact same thing happening in this movie. And then by the time I played Spider-Man 2, I only lost to Craven 4 times.
That's called progress.
Yep.
I do like the little moments, especially when they get to the point where it's him and Emily Blunt on the beach together. They know exactly like when and where each of the mimics are going to come to kill them, so they just have like the perfect timing. It reminds me of like when I watch video game speedruns. When they're so in tune with like knowing what the AI is going to do, and they know their cycles, that they're just hitting buttons at that point. It's just like, you know, the pattern. Now it's just about doing it. I love that progression. We shouted out Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. They're definitely like the two big stars of this movie. Another guy I want to shout out is Bill Paxton, who this was one of his last roles. He died shortly after this movie. Master Sergeant Farrell. He's spectacular in this movie. He plays a straight military dude so well. I didn't list out all the actors that play like the J Squad, which are they're basically just like they're like cannon fodder characters. But I think the J Squad's also like really well done. Kind of builds like a camaraderie with these people, despite the fact that none of these people know him. That's the funny thing is this movie is told from Tom Cruise's perspective, but every single time he meets Emily Blunt, she's meeting him for the very first time. He has to go through this like relationship with her where he's building up that rapport, but to her he's just like a guy that she met today. It's super weird. And like, and the movie goes into like she did the same thing in reverse before. So like she had to watch her partner die like over and over and over again. It's super interesting. I love the way the two actors like play off each other. I think it's great.
Yeah, they're good together. And I've seen some of their interviews for this movie too. Like they really had a fun time doing this.
Yeah, and I was trying to think, like, I mean, where does this rank on you when it comes to like Emily Blunt performances? I feel like this is the one role where people watch this and they started fan casting her as like every female superhero you can imagine.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, she needs to be Wonder Woman. She needs to be Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
She needs to be Invisible Woman. Like she needs to be something. She needs to be in by some fucking miracle, she has not been cast yet. If there's some Fantastic Four casting that comes out between the, you know, us recording this and us releasing this, I apologize. As of now, she has not been cast in anything so far. And that seems like a giant upset because she's super intimidating in this movie, despite the fact, I mean, she's not like a big person and she's like a badass. She like wields like a giant ass sword, like a buster sword that she like drags behind her. She's great. Like what an awesome role for her.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know how many other Emily Blunt performances I've seen. We saw The Quiet Place together like a long time ago, and she's great in that, but it's a completely different role. This is definitely the one that, like you said, really showed her skills as an action star, and I haven't seen other films.
Yeah, because like I guess her breakout was Devil Wears Prada, which is obviously a completely different role than this.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet.
She's in Looper, which is she's the female lead in Looper, the Rian Johnson movie. She's also she's in Mary Poppins, obviously. Sicario. Have you seen Sicario?
I did see Sicario.
She's great in Sicario. I think that they're trying to like get the cast back together to do like for Sicario 3, get like the original cast together for that.
Good. Are they gonna get Denis back?
Yeah, that's the idea. Get Villeneuve, Del Toro, you know, Brolin, and obviously she was in Oppenheimer this year, which I wouldn't be surprised if she snags a Best Supporting Actress nomination for that.
One of two women in that film.
You're right that we haven't seen her in this specific role too often, which I feel like she'd be perfect for like more action roles like this.
Maybe she's an actress who's interested more in like flexing her range than in being an action star. I think her husband gets typecast a lot as like a military guy,
which is fucking hilarious for the guy who blew up from playing Jim in The Office.
Yeah, maybe they don't want to have like two jacked military stars in that family, but I think you're right. She would be very good for any superhero.
Where do you think this ranks on time loop movies? I'll give you some other ones. We just talked about Looper. Looper is also a time loop movie.
Do they loop a lot in that?
They don't loop actually in the movie, but looping is like the whole concept.
Right. I don't know if I'd count that. Like I would count that more as a generic time travel movie than a time loop movie.
Obviously, there's Groundhog Day. That's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, Groundhog Day is fun.
There's Happy Death Day, which is a more recent.
I keep trying to watch that. Haven't seen it.
Maybe we'll watch Happy Death Day sometime. It's good. And so the sequel, Happy Death Day to You, is also pretty good.
Such a good title.
And then there's another one called Source Code, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, which came out I think around the same time as Edge of Tomorrow.
What that's about?
Yeah.
You know, I think I used to mix those up, and I didn't see either.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen a lot of these.
But Edge of Tomorrow, like, it makes me, like, looking at all these movies have, like, good reviews.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking to myself, like, they should just do more time loop movies. This seems like a concept that, like, always works.
Yeah, the one I'm thinking of is called Palm Springs.
I've not seen Palm Springs.
It's a comedy. Yeah. It's a romantic comedy. So this boy is stuck in a time loop. He's not a boy. He's a man. But this man is stuck in a time loop, and he's trying to woo this woman, and then eventually he does. But then she gets stuck in the time loop by the same mechanism, so they're both trying to figure out if they should be together and also get out of the time loop. So it's a fun movie.
It's just a concept that just seems to work over and over. We were just talking about Loki season 2. The last couple episodes of Loki season 2 have a lot of time loop elements in it, and it's great in that too. It just seems like there's something about that like directors can like really like sink their teeth into it and like bring out these character moments. I was trying to see if this was the best science fiction film of the 21st century. I was looking up some lists for this. I'm actually curious. We can kind of like like go in a couple different directions with this. When I say science fiction film, what do you think? Like, what would be the criteria for a sci-fi film? Like, how wide do you cast that net?
I think this one counts, but like barely. I generally think it requires more philosophical ideas behind it. So like Blade Runner, like stuff written by Asimov or Philip K. Dick. The science part is just like a layer for them to really posit some of their philosophical ideas and beliefs. So Dune is good for that. Blade Runner, things like that. But like Aliens by James Cameron is like barely a sci-fi movie to me. It's more of just an action movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I like when I think sci-fi, there's three main components that I think are, it's aliens, space, and the future,
Right.
Or like time travel or something like that. I understand you can go way wider than that. If you look up lists of like best science fiction movies, you're gonna see like a whole like swath of like different genres. I think the one that I was looking at, the number one film was Children of Men, which like I don't think of Children of Men as a science fiction movie.
I wouldn't call it a sci-fi movie either.
When it comes to like my criteria, at least, like these are the films that like I would say are in the running for best of the 21st century. Obviously Dune, which we're both big fans of, Arrival, another Villeneuve film.
Oh yeah, Arrival's so good.
Ex Machina, the Alex Garland movie.
I haven't seen that yet.
Inception, I would definitely call a science fiction movie. And then Interstellar, absolutely a science fiction movie. Blade Runner 2049, another Villeneuve movie. And then like for like a wild card, I said like Wall-E. I'd say like Wall-E science fiction.
Maybe Annihilation.
Yeah, another Garland movie. It's like going in a different direction with it. I think Edge of Tomorrow is like up there with all these movies.
Oh, for sure.
I think it competes. Yeah. I do not give a lot of like 5-star reviews. You know, shout out to Letterboxd. If you guys want to check out some cool Letterboxd stuff, we got that in our Discord server. Ever since we started this podcast, I've been like really making a point to log all the movies that we've been watching. And I gave this movie 5 stars. I do not give a lot of movies 5 stars. I think this is like a damn near perfect movie. It's under 2 hours long, which is a goddamn miracle because there's so much that happens in this movie. I just think it's awesome. And I'm surprised that like more people haven't seen it. I mean, why do you think that is? Given like the star power behind it, like it's an interesting story. Is it just like people forgot about this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many times I saw the trailer in 2014. I feel like I didn't know too much about this movie. I don't think I knew that it was a time loop movie. So maybe there was a missed opportunity in the marketing. Even if the trailers do convey that it's a time loop movie, I feel like they probably didn't convey how funny this movie is. And I think at the time, you know, Tom Cruise has had a renaissance within the last 10 years or so, but this was kind of at the start of it. Like, this is pre-Mission Impossible Fallout. Is this pre-Rogue Nation?
I think so.
This is before Rogue Nation.
Oh, this the screenplay for this movie is written by Christopher McQuarrie, who did who did the recent Mission Impossible movies. So that guy just knows how to write for Tom Cruise.
They're besties. But yeah, I would say that Tom Cruise didn't have this. He still had a lot of star power, right? He's an A-lister, but like Jack Reacher didn't do particularly well.
Yeah, he had done another science fiction movie before this called Oblivion, which also nobody has seen.
Yeah. So it just kind of got lost in the sauce there, I feel like. Since its release, people have been reappraising it, and it's been labeled as one of the great sci-fis of the 21st century. Did it make the lists that you were reading?
Yeah, it did. It was like 20th, something like that. So I mean, it's on the list for sure. I would say like this might be just in general like one of the best movies of the 21st century. It didn't get like any like Oscar buzz. Did get like a handful of different awards for like Emily Blunt got some award nominations. Tom Cruise got some.
That's good.
The VFX, we didn't really talk about the VFX much, but it's almost like so good that you don't think about it when you're watching it.
Yeah, so I think like you already said, one, the aliens are really cool, the design is amazing, and they move in really interesting ways. Two, all the humans are basically wearing mech suits. It feels like it's ripped straight from like a Japanese anime or manga, which it was. And the mech suits look amazing. And then, yeah, like they have like giant swords that pop out of the suits. They have like buster cannons and missiles that pop out of the shoulders and stuff. Actually, it's like a wingspan thing that opens up and shoots the missiles out. It's really amazing designs. And I think you told me that the mech suits were practical.
All the suits are practical, which is
so heavy, right? That they had to be...
Yeah, it's wired.
they had to be controlled with wire.
I think the beach is just a giant set that they built, but it is a practical beach set that they made that just has like a bunch of like blue screen around the edges of it. And yeah, all of the mech suits, they just have like wires holding them because it's so damn heavy. That's why like when you see them running on the beach, it almost looks like they're almost like floating and hopping a little bit, which is like also pretty cartoony.
Yeah, and it still looks great, right? Because mech suits have, if mech suits were real, they would have the mechanic to kind of boost you up with every step.
Yeah, because the human body's not going to be able to carry all that weight. I mean, I think of the mech suits in Avatar, where like those they kind of feel more heavy, but they still have like the flexibility of like a normal person. I actually think it's done better in this movie, and it's cool that like the mech suits are clearly like built to fight against these the mimics, even though they just get fucked up like every single battle they have.
Yeah, like I mean, we watched this and we watched Starship Troopers around the same time, and I think both times I was like, why are they sending infantrymen to fight these giant bug aliens?
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's like, don't think about it.
Yeah.
It's not important.
like we're already so far past D-Day style warfare that it doesn't make sense to just be sending like all your troops to one place to do gunfire. And I would imagine in the future we'd be even further past that, but no, that doesn't make for good movies. We like seeing that type of combat.
So would you be interested in a sequel to this movie? You think a sequel to this could be done?
I don't think it would live up to the first one, but yeah, I mean, I would watch it. Yeah.
Yeah, Emily Blunt, Tom Cruise, and Doug Liman have been talking about doing a sequel to this movie for a while now.
They got to do it before Tom Cruise is like 75.
Yeah, before he like actually kills himself in one of these Mission Impossible stunts.
Yeah.
They were talking about it being like a prequel of sorts, even though they're bringing back the same cast. So, I mean, obviously it's going to have time travel again in some regards.
Yeah.
They'd have to do it where like, oh, they didn't actually kill off like the head mimic or like the Nexus or whatever the fuck they called it. Even if they did something as basic as like you just told Emily Blunt's story that is only like referenced in this movie, I still think they could do a cool thing with that, even though you know the results of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'd much prefer a sequel to a prequel, and that's just generally how I feel about stories. But I do think with the time travel involved, they're probably cooking something that involves both. I don't think they would just do a prequel. I think they would do a stealth sequel, even if the majority of it takes place before this film.
Yeah. But yeah, overall, it's an awesome movie. However, that's not the point of this podcast.
Right.
We're not just saying this is a good movie. I have the job of arguing this movie is underrated. You've got the overrated.
Yeah, you've got the
job for this one. Before we get into that, though, we have to give our objective score here out of 10, a very scientific objective scoring system. Where do you think audiences fall for this movie?
I think audiences love this movie, except for the ones who haven't seen it.
I should say the Rotten Tomatoes for this film, 91% critic, 90% audience score.
So obviously,
both really high. It had a kind of a low cinema score. It had like a B+ cinema score.
That's weird. Whatever. Obviously, audiences like this, but I do think it is something that gets lost in the sauce. Like, people don't talk about this the way they talk about a lot of the other
Yeah,
sci-fi
it's
movies.
weird. It's one of those movies where like people really like it, but like only the people that have seen it.
So when we do this scale, we're not just talking about the reception of people who have seen it. We're talking about its like cultural relevance as well, like its overall footprint. So because of that, even if it's like a 9 out of 10 movie in the minds of 10 people, I think that because it's so overlooked, I'm gonna put it at like a 6.
I'll help you out a little bit. I was gonna put it at like a 7.
All right.
So we can land on a 6.5. I think that's fair for like an objective score. Subjectively, we both really like this movie. Yeah. Okay. So Jason, you have the job of arguing that Edge of Tomorrow, a film that we have been singing its praises for the last however many minutes of this podcast, you're arguing it is overrated. What is your pitch?
Well, like I was saying before about my criteria for a science fiction film, I think it generally has to have some interesting theses or themes behind it. So like The Matrix has so much stuff about identity and what does it mean to be real, and like, you know, is the world that we live in real or a simulation, and then what does that mean? Blade Runner has a lot of themes about identity and what it means to be human, things like that. Annihilation's got a lot of questions about nature and pondering the meaning of existence. This movie, by comparison, a little bit empty-brained. Not a lot going on up here. I'm pointing at my head, by the way, if you're only listening. Not too much to chew on, philosophy-wise. You watch this movie and you think about how funny it was and how action-packed it was and how well done everything was, but you're not like, well, what did this have to say about humanity? You've got the scope of a galactic war, humans versus this new alien? What does that mean? What does it highlight about humanity? And it doesn't really, not only does it not answer those questions, it doesn't really ask those questions.
It doesn't give a fuck about your questions.
No. So when you're looking at it through the context of like great science fiction, you know, like Philip K. Dick and Asimov, they wouldn't write this story because they're not interested in just writing a badass story, which is what this is. So I think if this film asked any sort of like question like that, I think it would become an instant 5-star perfect film. But because it doesn't, I think it's not challenging itself to that standard. So I can't say that this is as great a movie as you're saying. I can't say that it's a 5-star film.
So you're saying that this movie kind of is like James Cameron's Aliens,
Yeah.
where
Yeah. So
it's got
into that.
Yeah, it's got science fiction elements, but it is more of an action movie or like an action comedy at some points.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you have all this, like these sci-fi elements in terms of the aesthetic, in terms of the combat and the aliens, you know, you use all that and then you don't really use it to like say anything, then that kind of knocks it down a little bit for me.
All right. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. The movie definitely, obviously, it's not going for that. So, but if that's what you're looking for in your science fiction film, there's certainly alien films out there that ask those existential questions.
Sure. And to an extent, that's what I'm looking for in any given movie. Like, it's something that will make me feel something beyond like, hoorah, yeah, badass, let's get them, right? Like, even in a romantic comedy, I want to feel like, oh, these people are falling in love. I want to get that feeling of like love and sympathy and empathy and all that. In like dramatic movies, I want to feel sad. This movie, all I felt was the adrenaline, which is a great experience. It is wonderful. But I do generally like my movies to have something going on up here.
Yeah, listen, I understand. Like you're watching the movie and you're getting an action boner, but you're like, what I really want is a boner in my brain.
Yes, that's yeah. Put that on a t-shirt.
Don't clip that. Editor's note. I have the job of arguing that this movie is underrated, and I think the argument is kind of made for me already in that like everybody either doesn't know this movie exists or absolutely loves it. There's no in between for this film, and that's what makes it underrated is that somehow even with like a lot of word of mouth and the fact that it's done really good on VOD and streaming in the years since it's been released, it's still not thought in that upper echelon of even just like action movies. You know, it will take science fiction out of it or like highbrow science fiction out of it. This is a film that can go toe to toe with like a Villeneuve movie or an Alex Garland movie or Ridley Scott movie. I think it should be thought of on that level, and for some reason it's just not. It is a movie that got completely overlooked, and my understanding, at least like before I was doing research for this podcast, was that it got fucked up in marketing. I made the joke at the beginning of this podcast that this movie had like 3 names to it. The book is called All You Need Is Kill, and then they rebranded it to Edge of Tomorrow. Both of those names do not give you any like remote indication that this is a time loop science fiction movie. And then they later renamed it a third time to Live, Die, Repeat, which is way better.
Yep.
But they did that, I believe, after the movie was released on streaming.
Yeah, and they've like changed it back, right? Like
I think it's now called Live, Die, Repeat, Edge of Tomorrow.
so stupid. And why would they wait till after it's on streaming? Like at that point, you're too late.
Yeah, so they realized too late that people, like you said, people probably just didn't know what this movie is about.
Yeah.
Even though Tom Cruise is like arguably the most like recognizable action movie actor going right now, he's one of very few actors on the planet who can sell a movie solely from him being in it. This is like before Emily Blunt like really blew up as an actress, but I feel like, yeah, if they did make a sequel today, the star power of those two alone and the word of mouth that like, hey, the first one was really fucking good actually, like that second one would probably make a ton of money.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it would be similar. I think it'd do really well overseas, but you know, Tom Cruise just put out Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and that kind of struggled. You know, star power doesn't do what it used to. to bring out audiences, even with your biggest stars.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. Again, this movie did okay at the box office. That's part of the reason why it's gotten like sequel buzz. Movies less so get sequels because the first one was good and more that the first one made money. The fact that they've been talking about a sequel for this means that like, you know, the studios would be willing to foot the budget to like make a sequel to this film.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this one also did particularly well in like home markets. Like if the Blu-ray release for this is above average for like Blu-ray releases today.
I think it checks a lot of boxes. It's a great watch it on a Friday night movie. Basically any aspect of it, I would say, makes it an easy candidate for underrated. Ooh, slip up. When we talked about wanting to do this movie for the podcast, this is one of those movies that you think of when you think of what's a movie that's underrated.
Yeah, genuinely underrated, yeah. Not that that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we can go into the conclusion now. I mean, like, what do you think? Like, honestly, would you say this?
Underrated. No one saw this movie and it's awesome. Yeah, I meant what I said about it being a little empty-headed, but like this movie rules.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah,
movies do not need to be big brain. You can be monkey brain.
Yeah, I think my argument was more that this isn't like classic science fiction, and that's fine.
I do think there is a certain type of like cinemaphile that would watch this movie and go, it'd feel like unfulfilled, like watching it, like, oh, this movie's not smart enough for me, you know, like assholes. This movie's bad for assholes. For people that just want like a good movie, I mean, man, this is a great movie.
It's fun.
It's really, really fun. Can't recommend it enough. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. Tom Cruise is great in it. Emily Blunt's great in it. It's mech suits. You can't go wrong with mech suits.
Yeah, love a good mech suit.
Anyway, that's going to be it for the podcast here, guys. As a reminder, you can check us out on YouTube as well as Spotify, Apple Pods, anywhere you get your podcasts. For myself, for Jason, that's going to be it for this one, guys. We will see you on the next Over Under Movies podcast. See you at the movies.
Bye.